Hi, today we'll be going through reproduction in humans. So for reproduction in humans, these are generally the items that we need to think about. Number one, we'll look at the physiological appearance of how the male reproductive system is like, the internal structure. And you would have in questions, generally the questions will more towards of giving you the diagram, and you have to actually identify the parts of it, both the side view as well as the front view. Similarly, for female, that is something that you would also have to actually take note of. Next is puberty. So puberty is this process of sudden change in the physical change in your body after a certain age for both male and female. Next, we also look at sexual reproduction in humans, how the whole process of actually producing the fetus or the baby. And then at the same time, we talk about sexually transmitted infection, which is your HIV and what's not. So for the male reproductive system, right, you will need to know how to label the individual parts where. And follow-up questions, usually in exams, is that after the labeling, you have to state the function or the feature. An extended question that they can actually ask you about, right, is in the event that such organ or such portion actually fails or malfunction, what will happen? How would the male reproductive system actually occur? Likewise for females, similarly will ask. So number one, we look at the prostate gland, then we have the seminal vesicles, and we have the corpus gland. The sperm duct is basically this duct that allows the passageway of where the sperm is being to travel. And in this case, right, the sperm is generally produced in your testes. Then of course you have your penis, urethra. Do take note, it's urethra and not ureter. Okay, they are two separate items. And then you have your scrotum, which is actually the portion that houses the testicles outside of your body. Reason being is because in your internal human body system, 37 degrees Celsius is actually quite high, and this will lead to it's not a very good optimum temperature for the sperm development to be. Okay, and then of course you have your epidermis. So for the testes, right, the testes will actually produce sperm, and not just sperm but also the male sex hormones such as your testosterone. So testosterone is like the hormones that will actually give you that male characteristics, like a deeper voice is one example, muscular body in some sense. Then of course you have your epidermis, which actually stores inactive sperm from the testes before they are actually released into the sperm ducts. The spermatic cord generally supplies blood to the testes, and this would actually help in the form of keeping your testes alive so that it can continue its function of producing the sperms and also the testosterone. Next, you have your scrotum, which are pouch-like sacs located outside of your human body cavity, like what was suggested. This is because the external environment has a lower temperature as compared to your own body's temperature of 37 degrees Celsius. Hence, this will actually help promote the development of sperm. For your sperm duct, okay, some textbooks will write as vas deferens. This is generally the pathway traveled by sperms after they are released from the testes. For the male reproductive system, the seminal vesicles would help to store sperms temporarily before they are released through the urethra, and that the seminal vesicles, they also contain your prostate gland and your corpus gland that helps to activate sperms by secreting a slippery fluid that contains nutrients and enzyme. This mixture of this fluid and the sperm is what we call the semen. The urethra, it's a tube that extends from the bladder through the penis to the outside of the body, and both the urine and the semen will exit the body through the urethra, but never at the same time. So the spindle muscles at the base of the urinary bladder helps prevent urine from exiting the body during ejaculation. For the male reproductive system, the penis tends to actually, it's just an erectile organs that will become erect and hard during sexual intercourse in order to actually enter and deposit semen into the vagina. And erection would generally occur when the spongy tissue in the penis is filled with blood. So this is actually similar to how the idea of Viagra works, where um, in simple terms, it's like after taking the Viagra, right, it will actually promote blood flow into the penis, and that leads to actually an erection. Okay. So next, this is how your sperm looks like. If it's just one single sperm, you call it a spermatozoa. Zoa is generally the Latin more for what do you call that? Animals lah. Okay, so they are generally produced throughout the lifetime of a male human after he reached physical maturity. However, over a person's life, right, as you age, right, the number of sperms will actually reduce drastically. And then of course later there's some point that you cannot produce anymore lah. So the sperm actually has three main portions. You have the head, the middle piece, and the tail, where the head will actually consolidate the acrosomes, the cytoplasm, as well as the nucleus, whereas the middle piece is where it houses all the mitochondria. So the mitochondria is these organelles that will actually generate some form of energy for the sperm to actually move. Okay, then of course the mobility of the sperm is due to the tail. So in the head, it will contain the nucleus that will carry one haploid set of chromosomes and a small amount of cytoplasm and an acrosome that will contain enzymes for breaking down parts of the egg membrane for sperm penetration. So these are some examples of how the sperm looks like at the head portion. So the acrosome is the one that would actually, when it wants to penetrate to fuse with the egg, right, it will actually break down the egg membrane. So that is and what you will realize later on is that only one sperm will fuse with the ovum, and after that it will shut the membrane will shut off to the other sperm who hasn't fused it. Okay, then the middle piece will contain numerous mitochondria that will provide energy for the sperm to swim to the egg, and that the flagella helps to beat to enable the sperm to actually swim towards the egg. Now comes the female reproductive system. For the female reproductive system, right, it contains these few portions. You have the oviduct, the ovary, the uterus, the uterine lining, the cervix, the vagina, and the vulva. So all these are parts of the female reproductive system which requires you to label. So must be very familiar with the frontal view and the side view. And one unique thing that you can see from the diagrams, right, for both the male and female is that for the male reproductive system, right, the passage of where the urine and the sperm exits, right, is actually through the same passageway, which is the penis, and then your feces is generally coming out from the other segment, okay, through the rectum. So what happens for female, the unique thing is that the passageway for the reproductive organ, right, is actually different from the urinary tract, which is highlighted in yellow. And then of course the one circle in blue is where the feces will come out. So that's where the digestive system comes out. So what we can see is that for the male versus the female, right, the female have three separate passageways for items or discharge of items. Okay? So the ovary, right, will produce eggs and female sex hormones such as your estrogen and progesterone. In your syllabus, there's only these two hormones that you have to be familiar with. So estrogen and progesterones, right, they tend to be involved in the menstrual cycle, mainly through the maintenance of the uterus lining. If not, it's the build-up of the uterus lining. A lack of such hormone can also lead to the breakdown of the uterus lining, leading to things like menstrual cycle and things like this. Okay, so for the oviduct, right, it's this portion over here, in which, right, it's actually a narrow muscular tube with a funnel-like opening at the ovary. So the mature eggs are released from the ovary into the oviduct to be fertilized. For the female reproductive system, the uterus is the location where the fetus will actually develop, and it has the elastic muscular walls enabling contraction during birth to expel the fetus. Whereas for the uterus lining, it has a smooth and soft inner lining of the uterus, and this is important for embryo implantation. So embryo implantation is usually the first few stages of, it's the early few stages of reproduction already after fusion of your sperm and your ovum. Okay, next is your cervix. Your cervix is this circular ring of muscles at the lower end of the uterus, and the vagina is the location where this semen is generally deposited during intercourse, and it spans around the cervix to the vulva. So just take note of the difference. One is on the inside for the cervix, and then of course the vulva is on the outside. Okay, so this is how the sex cell from a female looks like. It's the ovum. In plural, we call it ova, and these are generally present in the ovaries of a female at birth. So the ovaries is the one that produces the ovum. So eggs are generally released into the oviducts from the time a female reaches puberty until she reaches around the age of 45 to 55, in a way like menopause of age. And we could see that for the whole ovum, right, it doesn't have any form of like tail for mobility and things like this. However, an ovum is very large in size, and yeah. So inside the ovum, right, it is mainly made up of a large nucleus that contains only a haploid set of chromosome. Now, the meaning of haploid here means half the number of chromosome of a normal human body. So like for example, for human cells, right, we have a total of 46 chromosomes. So a normal cell, you have 46 chromosomes. And so what this means is inside the nucleus of an ovum, you actually have 23 chromosomes. Okay. So why is it half the numbers? Because later on during fertilization, right, 23 chromosomes from the ovum were fused together with the other 23 chromosomes from the sperm. When this fusion comes together, it will then form 46 chromosomes. If the ovum actually contains 46 chromosomes and it fuses with a healthy sperm at 23 chromosomes, the new cell will generally have 69 chromosomes, and that is actually very abnormal already, and it can lead to a lot of conditions like medical conditions like, let's say, Down syndrome and what's not, which is not what we want here. So there's one thing to take note of. Large amount of cytoplasm will also result in a small amount of yolk, and the cell surface membrane is usually surrounded by an outer membrane. Okay, so there we have it. That's generally the male and female reproductive system. Now we will be talking about puberty. So for puberty, the key thing that you need to know is the menstrual cycle. And when you talk about the menstrual cycle, you have to actually make reference to the effects of the progesterone and the estrogen. Okay, these are two main hormones that is found in female's body. So number one, puberty helps to refer to the stage of human growth and development in which a person's body becomes capable of reproduction. And during this period, the sex organs will mature, the sex organs will secrete sex hormones, leading to the production of testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone for female. So for male it's testosterone, for female it's estrogen and progesterone. So these sex hormones will then cause secondary sexual characteristics to develop. And the development in characteristics differs. In males, right, what we do see is you actually form facial hair or hair grown in the pubic region. Of course, enlargement of your reproductive organs, and the deepening of your voice due to the lilacs actually being enlarged. And of course, the production of your sex cells. Okay, in males, it's your sperm. For female, on the other hand, of course, hair will grow not so much in the facial region, but more so in the pubic and at the under the armpits. Your reproductive organs also do enlarge. Your hips will widen, and then of course you will start the menstruation cycle, and ovulation can also occur. So what is this menstrual cycle? So it's actually a cycle of events that takes place in a female reproductive organs every month. But do take note, the menstrual cycle timeline varies from female to female, Reason being is because there are a lot of factors that influence it, like for example hormones, stress level, etc. So that's one thing to take note of, and that for the menstruation, the monthly discharge of blood from the uterus via the vagina is where it marks the first day of the menstrual cycle. In a female adult, the average length of a menstrual cycle is 28 days, and there is actually a natural variation in the length of the menstrual cycle ranging from 21 to 33 days. This menstrual cycle can also be affected by a few things like your stress, your illness, unbalanced diet, or even malnutrition. So how it all begins is due to the changes in the follicle during the menstrual cycle. The ovary will first contain developing follicles. So these are like cells, mini cells kind of thing, that eventually have young, that has different stages. So like at young follicles, they are generally called primary follicle. After that, this primary follicle, what it has is actually a potential egg cell that is surrounded by a layer of smaller cells known as your follicle cells. The primary follicle will then slowly develop over time to form a Graafian follicle, and in this case, that it will actually contain the mature egg, and this is usually surrounded by even more follicle cells and a fluid-filled space. At this stage, this is where the egg is then is ready to be released into the oviduct by the ovary. So generally, by estimation, one egg is released every month, where the ovaries will take turns to actually release an egg. So for human body, right, for female human body, there is actually two ovaries. That doesn't mean that two of the ovaries, right, will secrete simultaneously. For majority of us, it's generally a shift. Like let's say the left one will release this month, then the following month it will be the right. But there are cases where both ovaries can release at the same time. Then that's where you have the chance of getting twins. Okay, not so much of identical twins, but just twins per se. Okay. So for identical twins, is generally one of the ovary is being secreted. However, this ovary can undergo some form of replication again, forming two identical ovaries. I don't think that will happen. Sorry, it's more towards after the fertilization. Then that fertilization is slowly separate out into two separate eggs, and then that's where you two separate embryos that contains the same genetic information, leading to the formation of identical twins. Okay, so ovulation occurs when the Graafian follicle will rupture, releasing the egg into the oviduct, and the ovulation typically occurs on the 14th day from the start of the menstrual cycle. Okay, so again, 14th day, the first day is counted on the day of discharge. Now this 14th day, right, is just a rule of thumb. Usually you can plus minus 2 days to calculate the period of ovulation. So after ovulation, the ruptured Graafian follicle will develop into a corpus luteum, and this corpus luteum will produce hormones that will prepare the body for pregnancy. If fertilization does not occur, the corpus luteum will eventually break down. Now comes the stages in the menstrual cycle. So for stages in the menstrual cycle, what we can see is that it has 28 main days, where the first stage is the menstrual flow stage from day 1 to day 5, and during this part is whereby there is a lot of heavy overflow of blood discharge and what's not. Okay, following which is the follicle stage, which is day 6 to 13, and that's where the concentration of estrogen is the highest. And then following it from day 11 to day 17 is the period of ovulation, where day 14 is the highest, is the day of ovulation. Now, what is this difference? It means that, right, during this period of time, right, if the sperm actually is close to the egg, that's where you have the highest chance of pregnancy. Okay, and then of course, at day 17 to 18, progesterone concentration is the highest. In the event that there is actually fertilization occurring, then the levels of progesterones will actually continue to remain high to maintain the uterus lining. So for estrogen, right, the purpose of estrogen is mainly there to actually repair, is to really build your uterus lining and to actually maintain it. Whereas for progesterone, it's mainly for maintenance and repair. Okay, then after that, if let's say no fertilization occur, then from day 15 to 28, you will see that the uterus lining will start to break down slowly, in correlation to the concentration of progesterone's decrease, and then the whole cycle will repeat again. So the first 5 days, the uterus lining breaks down, flowing out of the body through the vagina, and this is where your anterior pituitary gland. So the anterior pituitary gland is located in the brain lah. It's the pituitary gland found in the brain, and this secretes your follicle stimulating hormone. So your follicle stimulating hormone helps to promote the formation of your primary follicle and of course the growth of it. So once your follicle development in the ovaries, and estrogen will be secreted by the follicles. So estrogen will cause the repair and growth of the uterus lining. Okay. So this one you need to know the function. Okay. Then next is so the follicle stage is where you have a high concentration of estrogen. This will inhibit. The meaning of inhibit means stop or prevent or slow down follicle stimulating hormone production. This would then prevent maturation and growth of more follicle. So that's where you cut off that there's only one ovum, one egg that is released lah. Okay, and stimulates the pituitary gland to secrete another hormone called luteinizing hormone. So what's the purpose of the luteinizing hormone? It helps to cause ovulation and the formation of the corpus luteum. Now, when you form the corpus luteum, it will then secrete progesterone and a little bit of estrogen, mainly to maintain the uterus lining. Okay, the progesterone will then prepare the uterus lining for the fertilized egg by either causing it to thicken further or to supply it with more blood capillaries. So you are like really preparing the body more for implantation subsequently. But that is provided if there is actually fertilization that occur. Okay, the progesterone will also inhibit any form of ovulation and follicle stimulating hormones production to prevent more ovums to be made ready when your body is already mature enough to want to just accept one particular embryo or what's not. So this is a chart of how it looks like, and we could see that the uterus linings growth coincides with the levels of progesterone and estrogen. But do take note that why even with a drop of progesterone, we don't see the uterus lining dropping, It's because it takes time for the body to actually take note of all these changes in the hormonal level. So if fertilization does not occur, number one, the egg will break down. The high concentration of progesterone will inhibit luteinizing hormones production. Having a lower luteinizing hormone level results in the corpus luteum to break down. The progesterone will no longer be secreted. Uterus lining breaks down. Uterus lining is discharged together with the blood through the vagina, marking the beginning of a new menstrual cycle. So then the follicle stimulating hormone is then produced by the pituitary gland, and the whole menstrual cycle will generally repeat. Okay. However, if fertilization occur, so that's where after the period of ovulation, the fertilized egg will become a zygote, eventually becoming into an embryo. So a zygote is this cell where the male sperm and the female ovums are being fused together. Then after that cell has slowly grow, multiply by a lot of other cells, then you form the embryo. So this embryo embeds itself in the uterine lining, and it secretes a hormone that prevents the corpus luteum from breaking down. Why is this so? The corpus luteum will then be able to secrete continuously the estrogen and progesterone to maintain the uterus lining, or to even grow it until the placenta forms, so that it is able to take over the production of both hormones. Okay. For the fertile and infertile period of the menstrual cycle, as ovulation occurs on day 14, the eggs can be fertilized up to 48 hours after its release. So that's where the sperm can live for 2 to 3 days inside the female reproductive system, and this is where the period you would want to be the most fertile. As if you have sexual intercourse during this period, there's a very high chance that there is a that fertilization can occur, and hence the rest of the days makes up the infertile period. Okay. Next, I'll be talking about the sexual reproduction in human, and of course the sexual transmitted infection. You may want to pause here for a while and actually look at the resources, the slides, and try to understand some of these things. Thank you.